This week, the See What I Mean team has been thinking a lot about default settings. How do we change them? How do we interrupt them? And what does that even mean? So, Stacy, Jordan, can you tell us what are we talking about when an organization is thinking about default settings?
We're talking about the things that you're not thinking about. In most cases, the default settings are usually the things that we take for granted in an organization. And I think Jordan and I have been thinking about default settings because we are often working with organizations in making a directional shift. So you've been going this way, and now you've made a decision you want to go a little bit more this way. And we find that groups will readily commit to that directional shift. They're excited, they're inspired. But when we get down to the day-to-day action, it's really hard to hang on to that. So if you think, for example, of the work on an organization wanting to work in a more inclusive way or in a more equitable way, when we think about the default settings, we're imagining everybody's got a to-do list on their desk every day. And how does that direction you're trying to head show up in each item on your to-do list? So if you're responsible for social media at your organization, and we have a goal of being more inclusive, how does that change who we decide to amplify on our social media platform? Or if we decide that we want to work more in relationship with our grantees, for example, if we're a funder, how does that change an idea like changing our grant application? Well, that would mean probably our first step would be to go out and talk to grantees or grant seekers about what's on our application. So what we're thinking about are all of the ways that organizations get work done and how to hold on to that new direction when you face your to-do list or your work plan. Jordan, I think you have some other examples of what other kinds of things that are default settings besides your to-do list.
Yeah, I think you have seen a blog on our Facebook and other places from Stephanie Closey around inside out values, right? So similar to what Stacy was saying, we're often really excited to draft a new set of values for our organization, but then we don't always do the work at saying, what does this actually change in our default settings of how we move forward, right? So we work with a lot of food banks in the network, and we hear this shift in values of being mostly about how much food we're moving to really thinking about who are we reaching? Who are those populations that we're not always serving as well? Who is not comfortable coming to a food pantry? And so it's a shift to people over pounds, right? And that's a shift that food banks can easily make. They see it, they understand it, they really feel it. But then it's the hard work of how does that shift what we measure as success? How does that shift of how we work every day on a day-to-day basis? So it's taking the value statement and saying, what are the default settings that are going to keep us from living out this value in real life? And how do we really name that and then name our successes and how we shifted our values and be prepared to show a different set of metrics that show those values over our previous values, because metrics can also be a very default setting too. We've always measured this as our measure of success, and now our value has changed. If this metric stays the same, we're just going to keep doing the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's like values, metrics, daily to-do list. I think the other place that happens is policies. And I would say that default setting can often be like industry-wide. It might not be the policies the particular organization has thought about. It's the ones they've received sort of by osmosis. So if you look in the field of philanthropy, for example, a lot of the rules that foundations list of who can and who can't give grants are very similar to other foundations in the industry. But if you go and track down, like, well, what is the real origin of this? It's honestly like somebody made it up and then we all decided to make it up. It's not usually because the IRS requires it. So I think making sure that the status quo of our industry, those default settings that we have taken in, that we question, do those really fit our new goals? Does that help us get in the direction? So it could be something like, we want organizations to be stronger, but the default setting in the industry is often no operating support, and we only like to fund new things. Well, there are good reasons that is a rule sometimes, but if our goal is to help organizations get stronger, probably helping them stretch to do a lot of new things without more resources for the center might not get us there. So this is the hard work of organizational change. And it's easy for us to pick them out today and show them, but we are in complete empathy with this. As people who have run organizations and have tried to make big changes, I think Jordan and I can both go back and say, oh, we missed an opportunity there. we should have X, we should have Y. So we love working with our clients to see what are all of those ways that you can inhabit this new direction in your policies, your to-do lists, your values, your words, your actions. So we think that's part of the fun once a strategic plan is done, of how do we really live it.
We're seeing a lot of clients interested in this work and interested in changing their metrics and some of the examples you all have mentioned. Why do you think that's happening now? What's special about this moment?
There's been a lot of disruption, right? So there's been forced disruption of our daily routines and our default settings, but then people have had the opportunity to say, why was I doing that? You know, what should I keep after this disruption has kind of calmed down and we wait for the next one, right? So I think there's been some introspection because of disruption. So we have a whole other series called Planning During Disruption that you can check out, but where it really tells us to stop and pause and think about what we're doing differently because the world is changing around us, and what should we really hold on to and change as a default setting moving forward.
When you start thinking about these things and thinking about questioning your default settings, it starts to bleed from your professional life into your personal life. We've talked about this a little bit. Jordan, you had a great example of seeing default settings in your personal life. Can you share that with us?
Right, all the way back to the 1900s, right? So my son is in Thornton Wilder's play Our Town. He plays Wally Webb, and so I've seen it a few times and I've read the script, and you know, kind of staying behind the curtain of See What I Mean. We often go on tangents when we're talking about these topics, and I was just reflecting on that play that was written about a town in the early 1900s. And spoiler alert, Emily dies. And she goes back to look at her life. And the play kind of shows this consistent routine of the town, right? It's their default settings. The mom gets up and cooks meals. The dad goes to work. The kids go to school. And when she comes back to see her life, you know, as a memory, she's just yelling at her mom to stop cooking and look at her, right? To stop, break the routine, break the default setting, and remember what's important. And I think that's really what we encourage our clients to do. You know, one of the practices that you're hearing about next month is focus on the mission, keep that at the center. And in order to do that, sometimes we have to break the default settings to pause and turn and look at what are we actually trying to do? And is this really getting us there? So it all bleeds together, right? And it's been an exciting thing to see how those things can really interact, and we can see how these aren't new ideas. They're just ideas we have to keep coming back to and realizing that they are still effective and meaningful today.
Well, thank you so much. To hear more from the swim team, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at seewhatimean.com/subscribe.